Oh my goodness. Thanks everyone for waiting for just a few minutes. We are getting started. Happy CultureCast Day, everyone. And welcome, Amanda Arrigotti-White, founder of Curate Co. I'm super excited to have you today on CultureCast. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And you and I got to cruise through the music on our own before we went live. But I always say, I feel like, especially when I have people like you joining my culture cast, there should be like these stars that then dissolve and then unveil who my guest is. That's what I feel like when that music comes on board. And so that's how I'm feeling with you being on my culture cast. Pretty phenomenal.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm so excited to talk all things culture.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And just reminding everybody, the whole reason why we do Culture Cast, it is about how do we help cultivate environments where everyone can thrive. And I think it's just such a natural tie-in to what it is that you do. When I think about hospitality, and I was saying this to you earlier, that, having been in this corporate space for 25 plus years, and, culture, it seems like, is this thing where, well, how do you go about it? How do you create it? And when I just think about the space of hospitality, when you're already there, I mean, I think it's just kind of this natural lean in on, well, how do you welcome people, right? And so that's why I'm psyched that you're on board and on this call. I love it.
Awesome. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I feel like hospitality is at the core of everything we do, but also I think a lot about it when I think about culture and creating agency culture and culture when it extends to our clients too.
Yeah, I love that. Well, before we jump into your company, I just want to jump into like your journey to, well, who is Amanda? How did you grow up? And then what kind of got you into this retail and hospitality space? So I'd love to hear that story.
Of course. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're in. So I grew up in Portland, Oregon. I am a Pacific Northwest girl through and through, even though I'm on the East Coast now. Um, but I have a big Italian family on my dad's side that's basically all in Portland. So grew up with a lot of cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents were a huge part of my upbringing. Um, I've definitely I definitely have always been incredibly stubborn, which as I've gotten older, I've been able to channel that into entrepreneurship and drive and some grit. I always like to think about that, especially from a professional standpoint, because I remember my mom and my grandma have like hilarious stories of my grandma has over, I think, 15 or 20 grandchildren and great grandchildren.
Oh,
And
wow.
I'm the only one that they had to put locks on the very top cabinets, because if I decided I wanted something up there, I would climb the 10 to 12 feet up there.
Did they put alcohol in the top cabinets? Is that what the deal was? Or
That would be, well, I think it was maybe 3 or 4. So I think it was probably cookies, like
oh,
chocolate.
wow. Okay. Wow.
But I think as I've gotten older, like how I started my career
Yeah.
path, I went to Gonzaga University for undergrad, and actually originally thought I was going to be a lawyer and follow in my mom's footsteps, and
Yeah.
a couple internships at law firms, and decided quickly that was not for me. Um, and had an amazing opportunity to intern and then post graduation work in house at Columbia Sportswear,
Yeah.
which is also headquartered in Portland, Oregon. So had just an amazing opportunity and an amazing experience while working there. I got to wear a lot of different hats and worked on large scale sponsorships, as well
Yeah.
as by the time I left was leading lifestyle public relations campaigns for the brand. So working with for the most part, female focused lifestyle publications like Shape, Women's Health, those type of things to land stories and product coverage. But I had a shift in my like mid 20s where I had this great experience at Columbia Sportswear, but wanted to see other industries. Still loved
Yeah.
PR, loved marketing. Had a great opportunity in Seattle to work in-house at St. Michelle Wine Estates, which for those of you who don't know, St. Michelle, a lot of people know Chateau St. Michelle, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
their like larger wine brand, but they also create and manage, I think at the time it was over 30 different wine brands. They also imported spirits. So they had quite a few. It's almost like working in an agency where you're working on multiple brands,
Yeah.
which was pretty cool. But also quickly realized too, coming from fashion and outdoor apparel that the wine industry at large, and especially and the beverage industry, was a bit behind at that point when it came to digital marketing and kind of some of the things that tech and fashion were starting to experiment with for digital conversions and, partnering with influencers and things like that. So I saw this white space and this opportunity to create this boutique agency that could provide that for our clients. But of course, I think like so many other people had a bit of imposter syndrome, like, oh, I'll do that in 10 years. I'll do it in 15 years. I'll do it later. And had soft sounded this idea by a mentor and a woman that I worked for in-house at St. Michelle. And she really encouraged me to go for it and was like, I have a couple brands within my portfolio. I have budget. If you go and start this agency, you'll be our agency of record. Like, I trust you. You've worked on
Wow.
these brands, go for it. So that was kind of the final push I think I needed to start Curate Co. And that was 8 years ago. So that was October is our 8-year anniversary.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. It only takes one. I'm just thinking like it
One.
only takes one to get you going, to really believe in you, and you need to believe in yourself to like really start that agency. That's amazing. I think it's interesting too. I think I knew this about your background, to go from fashion. And I love that. I remember all those magazines, and I know the world has changed so much today that a lot of that, I don't know, is shape even still around, but I think women's health is, just to be able to get fashion and put those placements in. And then to your point, like going to this wine estate of like St. Michelle Wine Estates and working with 30 different brands, I can see how you felt that agency vibe, although you're working inside, this major wine company.
Yeah.
And so, what was it where you kind of finally said, look, do you go off on your own? And I know it was just one, but there had to be that entrepreneur side of you. I think about you talking about coming from a huge family and being really a challenger, I think, in your family and being stubborn. Like, was it that? I think people always want to know, what was it, that one thing that happened in your kind of pathway growing up that pointed you towards being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think a bit of it was a bit of that stubbornness that I think as a child
Okay.
comes out as stubbornness, but I think if you can channel that as an adult, it comes out as drive and some grit. And I think you need that if you're going to start
Yeah,
your own business. And I think too, it's you have an idea of how things should be, and especially I think early on in your career in larger corporations, you don't have that much power to instill change. And I had this vision and this idea of what I wanted.
yeah,
My day to day to look like, but I didn't really have necessarily the power to bring those really creative ideas to life, to have the culture that I wanted, when I was in house, despite them being both great positive experiences. And so I think that stubbornness kicked in of like, wait,
I
there's
love
a
it.
way to create this. Like, I can create this for not only myself, but other people, and work with amazing clients that want to work with people like that.
That's amazing. And actually, I'm going to pivot a little bit just because there's a kernel here. Um, I was having a conversation with other chief human resources officers a week ago. I was at another meeting, and it was a large company. And we were actually having drinks at the end of a long day of talking about AI. And actually, everyone was talking about their children, and they're either in high school or they're in college, and they're getting ready to graduate. And we were just talking about the state of employment. While it's at a historic low, there's a big question mark with young people who are graduating right now from college, and they're worried about like their employability, right? And can they go and work at these large companies? And I jumped on right away and I said, I think the future to employment is entrepreneurship. I think the future to employment is, how do you instill confidence in this next generation, whether they're going to school or not? How do they bring that forward and bring their ideas to then create commerce, right, for themselves? And so I love what you just said about having a vision and having the creativity and just putting it out there. And I agree with you. I think um, that's why I've always been on this quest for creating culture, having worked in very large companies early on in career, and just going, if this is what it's like to work in a large company, I never want to do that again, although that's a whole other story. But yeah, what advice do you have for those young people who, I'll say this next generation, then we'll go on with your story, who are getting ready to graduate, whether they're entering right now or they're now figuring out, well, what am I going to do? How do they take that energy? Like lessons from you on how to do that. Like what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think I've had a couple conversations in coffee with a couple folks that have just graduated college who have ideas or who are still in college and
Yeah.
undergrad. And I think my number one piece of advice is to not be afraid to fail because you aren't going to accomplish anything if you don't at least try. And failure is on that path of
Yeah.
success. So I think, especially when you're young, you have less to lose in a certain extent. Like
Yes.
tied to, a mortgage or kids, like go out and try things. Like, and it's okay if you fail. Like, then you know that path, either you know what not to do, or you know that, that path isn't for you. But you're not going to learn anything and you're gonna be pretty stagnant if you aren't trying things. I think that's my number one piece of advice for young
Yeah.
people.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. And I agree with you. I think for young people or those who are trying to gain that experience to then get to the next thing, totally agree with you. Like there's not a lot to lose um, if you just if you try that now, right? I love that. So thank you for taking that quick pivot. Before we jump into the fun stuff that you're doing with Curate Co, I'm just even curious about the name. Let's jump into like culture. So, how would you define culture? What does it mean to you?
That's a great question. I think for me, culture is the lasting impression a team leaves on each other and also on the people that interact with that team. So, like thinking in a professional environment, the culture itself is what people are feeling and what they're left with after they, even 5 years after, they might remember something. Because I think there's lots of little moments of culture, but the really big pieces that define the culture of a workplace or of a team is a thing that you can describe 5, 10, 15 years later.
Yeah, I love that. I think what I'm hearing you say is it's really how people behave together, how they treat each other. Um, it's the feeling that's created because I think that it's not so much like, I think people are going to remember, yeah, the work that we did together, but how they felt about getting it all done together. If you're talking about it within a community inside a company, um, I love that. I always like to say this too. And you were saying this kind of behind stage, like before we went live, it really starts with who you are, right? Because I
Yeah.
think about like how people experience you, and it's one of my favorite sayings. Like I say this to people all the time when they're like, "Hey, tell me how that went," and I'll say like, "Here's how I experienced you." And sometimes it's like, "Oh my gosh, it was amazing," and sometimes it's like, "Did you realize that that happened?" It's like, "Oh my gosh, I don't want for that to be the outcome of how I behave." But yeah, I'm going to go back to behavior. So how do you create, like in your experiences, how have you created a moment where 5 years looking back, you're chatting with former colleagues? Like, tell me about that. Like,
Yeah.
how have you created those kinds of cultures that are memorable in a good and maybe even a bad way too? Yeah.
Totally. I think it starts with understanding what kind of culture you want to create and defining that and really putting it on paper too. And then I think you have to practice what you preach. So by that, I mean, one thing that I've always tried to instill in my team and also even in my clients whenever I can of is having work-life balance, whatever that means for you. And I think it does start with me. It starts with me showing
Yeah.
my team this is acceptable. And not only acceptable, but like I want you guys to do this. So that comes from, if I wasn't taking PTO, if I was signing on during holidays, if I have a sick kid at home and I'm not staying home or taking my kid to the doctor's appointment because we have, something, if I'm not having that work-life balance and showing them, then my team's going to do the same thing. So I try to make sure that in my everyday life and also in those big moments that I'm setting that example of like work-life balance. I also think that comes with, another tenet for us is transparency.
Yeah.
And I try to be super transparent with my team for the good stuff and the bad stuff. And I want them to do the same thing and same with our clients. And so I think for all of those pieces, you have to define what's really important to you. And it starts with leadership. Like, you have to practice what you preach, because nobody's going to feel comfortable doing or leading in your example, or following in your example if you weren't doing it too.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I love it. It's illustrating what I always have believed is that uh, culture is a reflection of leadership.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about is really respecting the human. And what I mean by that is, realizing that people have full lives, right? They fully bring it when they're present with you at, on in the work environment, whether it's in person or you're working hybrid or working remotely, but realizing that people are humans and that you respect their personal space when they need to take the time for whatever it is, however they're living their life. Yeah, I was actually just coaching someone and I was taking a dose of my own medicine too, literally like an hour ago. I was chatting with someone that I mentor via text, and he texted me, and let's say how I'll anonymize the story. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm getting ready to leave the hospital, Leah, at the end of today." And I'm thinking, what are you doing texting me from the hospital? Right, dude? Like, take care of yourself. This is not important. I will answer your text, when you have the question tomorrow or a week from now. And so I had to take a lesson from that too, because I think about earlier in my career as well, where I felt compelled to answer a text from like a higher up person. And I myself was coming out of a doctor's appointment and I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, I need to be fully present to what I'm doing right now for myself, versus like answering this text. So I love that you say this work life balance, I think is really important. And I also love one of kind of your leadership principles, which also is culture, of just being transparent on all news, whether it's good or bad, and just keeping people in the know of what's going on. I agree with you. I think that's really important to create trust, with people.
And I think going back to the work-life balance piece too, I think in a lot of my experiences when working at really large companies, we operate still in this, like, I think it was Ford's manufacturing 9 to 5. And that's not how the human brain works. That's not how
Yeah,
human life works, right? And so I've also tried from a personal standpoint, but also from a cultural standpoint of empowering my team. Like, hey, if you have a slump between 2 and 3, go outside, go for a walk, go for a
I
run,
love
go
it.
do your errands. Like, and I've started doing that because it came from me even analyzing my own day to day. I was like, at 3:30, I am my worst. Like, I am
Yeah,
not passed on very quickly. I'm not thinking big. And I need to get out of the house. I need to go for a run or go to the gym, and I will come back fresh. And if I have more work to do, I'll do it when my son goes to bed, and I
yes.
will come back with fresh eyes and fresh perspective. But I never want to have that type of culture where it's, you have nothing significant to do. It's 4 o'clock on a Friday, but can you please sit at your desk and stare at your computer, because I need to think that you're working from an optic standpoint. I've always really been against that type of culture. And so I think it stems really from a work-life balance standpoint. So that kind of connects to that tenet or that ethos that we have.
I totally agree. And I love that you're illustrating that too with how modern thinking it is for today. Although I always go back to this study I fully nerd out on. And Gallup created this huge study. They over like the last 10 years, and then they came out with this report at the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, and created a book. It's a book called It's About the Manager. And it was talking about this next generation, which is now in the workforce, and what they really value. And one of the big takeaways was it's not about the job, it's about my life and how they actually embrace their job as part of their life. And it's everything that you're talking about. So for managers, when they think about what do they do to attract, engage, and retain key talent, one of the key things that you need to be thinking about is like people don't just sign up for a job, like they think about how it fits in within their life. And then fast forward, we all lived through COVID and the pandemic. And I think a lot of companies figured that out, but then they're unwinding all of that, right? Because now it's a whole, I want you back in the office 4 or 5 days a week. And it's exactly what you're talking about. what is it exactly are we accomplishing 9 to 5 by having people sit at your desk versus really unlock the productivity of people when they're best at it. And I love your point of, if you're feeling a slump, I think the best thing for productivity is to walk away from what you're doing and then come back with fresh eyes and actually new energy. So I love that you're modeling that as a leader.
Totally. And I think too, so much of what we do at Curate Co is so creative based, and
Yeah.
you can't just churn that out, right? Like if you're in a slump, you're not going to come up with this brilliant idea for a PR campaign or a social media campaign or an event solution. Like you need to have that time and space to allow your mind to think through and problem solve and think creatively. And that
Yeah.
isn't going to happen with you sitting at a desk for 10 hours straight.
Oh, absolutely. All right. So let's talk about Curate and Co. And let's talk about how you are modernizing PR in the food and beverage world. And I know you talked a little bit about it when you decided to kind of play in this white space, which now that you've created, of how and you've also gone from working for a huge wine estate to now, helping boutique, smaller companies have a voice in this world. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we offer a couple different, this is a little bit of the background of Curate
Yeah.
Co. We offer a couple different services within public relations and marketing. So we do traditional PR, and that's part of where I think you kind of mentioned you want to know
Yeah.
where Curate Co, the name came from.
Yeah.
I often think of public relations and so much of marketing is storytelling. And we're not the ones necessarily making the story. We're
Yeah.
curating the story. We're listening, we're sitting down with founders or makers or winemakers, restaurant owners, chefs, and we're listening to their story. And then we're curating it in a way that we think is a way that will reach their target audience or who they're trying to tell that story to. And we pitch that out to media, journalists, freelancers. With that too, as you may know, PR has also evolved to have an arm into influencers. So we do a ton of work with influencers, both organic and also on a paid basis. So creators that have massive followings that are either very segmented out for a specific niche, like a beverage influencer or a lifestyle influencer. And we work with them to seed product for our clients and help be an arm of that storytelling on the digital space. And with that too, we also do both paid and organic social media management. And I think that's really fun for us to do both of those in tandem with one another, because I think the storytelling standpoint that's brand owned is so fun to think about. Like, what is the visuals? We get to produce and direct photo shoots and video shoots to bring that brand vision to life, and work hand in hand with in-house creative directors to bring that to life in a modern way of telling those stories in a way that as you're scrolling your feed on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook, it grabs your attention and you stop for even a couple moments. That's a big way of social media, right?
Right.
And then we also, as the final, last but not least, the final service we offer that it's really fun to see this flourish too post-COVID is tastemaker events. So we don't do large consumer events, but we do these really intimate brand events that are bringing typically media and influencers to experience a brand, firsthand and understand, get to meet the makers, try the products, understand how the products are made. Sometimes that might be a media trip where we bring a bunch of media out to a destination and they get to see and taste and feel and all the things, really be with all their senses in this new product or these people. And other times it's a dinner and it's something that's an experience that we're creating for this really intimate group. So that's been really fun to see that pick up, especially starting a bit last year and more this year of these fun events we get to plan and bring to life.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And I love that you get into these tastemaker events. There's something about just connecting people, right? And bringing people together, especially coming out of the pandemic. I think people are really craving that. I work with these other founders, and what really kind of inspired them to start their company was really sadness for like this loneliness epidemic that is really an outcome of COVID. And how do you bring people together? And so doing this in a way that is also bringing people, of course, press and influencers together with the brands that you're creating. But I think relationships and connections also are a big deal around culture as well. Like, how do you do that beyond just, hey, get to know this product, but there's something about getting to know the people and the personal story. I don't know. What do you think of that?
I totally agree. And I think that what we do is so relationship based. I think
Yeah,
on the media side, it's having relationships with our clients and really being an extension of their team, understanding the ins and outs of their products. And you need that foundation to be able to curate and figure out the right story to tell the right person. And then it's relationship based with our media contacts, our
sure.
contacts of knowing what's going on, what are they working on, what excites them, what are they so tired of hearing about that they don't want you to pitch them. um, and on social, it's cultivating relationships that feel personal with the target consumer. Like that is kind of the
Yes.
power of social media, right? Is it feels personal, even though it's a social media channel where you're reaching hundreds of thousands of people.
Right.
You need to look at it from that standpoint of how can I create a relationship with this person? It's not just me throwing content at them. We need to have a dialogue. We need to bring them into this brand universe. And I think it's all about relationships.
I agree. And actually, let's jump into that. And you and I were talking about this too, about the whole culture of hospitality, and you talk about it's about building relationships with people. Um, when I say that, tell me what your thoughts are. Like, what does it mean to create a culture of hospitality?
I think for me, hospitality is feeling like you are taken care of. So I think that can mean different things in different scenarios. I think a culture of hospitality for me is that, and it's definitely something we try to create at Curate and Co, is my team feels taken care of. They feel supported. I have their back. They can go and try things and they can fail and I have their back. And it means that my clients feel like that they're taken care of, that
Yeah.
we have their back and we have their best interest. If they succeed, we succeed, is what I often say to my team. And so I think hospitality, I think people often think of hospitality of like a dinner party and having the perfect
Mhm.
tablescape, which of course is incredibly fun and amazing. And I love hosting those. But I think at the end of the day, it's a feeling of being taken care of. And we try to create that relationship with our team at Curate & Co, with our clients, and also the partners that we work with, because we have great relationships with partners that we work with and collaborate on things with.
I love that. Actually, I'm going to quote you back. I think it's creating a culture of being taken care of. Look, if that is like one nugget for people to say, how do I create culture? I love that. Like, do people feel like they're being taken care of, that you care enough about their experience, right? How they're experiencing you in the moment, in the meeting, in the event, in the conversation. I love that. That's just such an easy way to think about culture, and hospitality. And, you reminded me at the same meeting last week, we were in Chicago, and I got to meet one of the co-founders of Boca Restaurant Group. His name is Kevin Bain, and he welcomed us into his restaurant, and it was a bunch of CHROs. And he told the story about what the restaurant reminds him of, and it's family, because the restaurant's been there 20 plus years. But he told the story, and I don't know if you've heard the story or not, and I'm probably not going to say it correctly. But what I recall was he and his co-founder were driving, or no, he and one of his chefs were driving between Springfield to St. Louis, and they got off the freeway and they hit up a Wendy's. So they go inside this Wendy's, and he tells a story. He goes inside the Wendy's, and this gentleman or this kid opens up the door, and he's like, "Welcome to Wendy's." And so they're like, "Oh, okay." They're super friendly in this town. And then they go up to the counter and they order their food and they get their food. And of course, they got the equal friendliness from what would you like, and so they were super friendly there. Then they get ready to sit down at the table and they notice the table was dirty. This person comes around again and like wipes it all down. Hold on a moment. Let me wipe this down for you. Have a seat, etc. And then another woman comes by with a pitcher at a Wendy's, right? And like has a pitcher of water and refills their water cup. And, would you like some more water? And then they're like looking at each other going, okay, we're at a Wendy's. And so Kevin told the rest of the group, he goes, look, we've got to go talk to the manager. Like, what is going on here? This is Wendy's, right? It's a fast casual, quick service restaurant. This is unusual. And so he went to go like ask for the manager, and the manager thought, oh my gosh, is everything okay? How's your experience? And they said, it's been phenomenal. Like, this is amazing. The way people are taking care of us and the way they're treating us, it's as if they own this restaurant. And then he pointed up to something on the wall, and I think it was the number one Wendy's in the United States. And this was back in 1997. So when I think about the words hospitality and the culture that was instilled inside that restaurant, right? Where everyone was just so excited to be there and excited to have people there and proud to show it off. And going back to what you said around taking care of people, like to that extent, think about, and I've come from this world of having worked at and having cultivated environments where it is, frontline, minimum wage plus hourly team members who were out there trying to hustle for themselves and their families, but also serve others, right? And to hear that story, it just warms my heart that like the manager has got to be creating a culture where people feel so empowered to be themselves and to treat each other in a way where they're taking care of each other. So I don't know what you think of that story, but I don't know if you've heard that before, but I think it's amazing.
No, I would say that is such a powerful story. I love that. And I love that it's a Wendy's too, because you expect that when you're going to like a 5-star fine dining restaurant.
Right.
To have that, it does show that culture is so powerful. Like if that manager and if that team wants to accomplish that and it's coming from the top down, like it can be anywhere that has that type of mentality of let's take care of each other. You feel taken care of. You have that hospitality as a team, and that extends to anyone who comes in and is a part of that or touches that team.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I love it too. I think he told that story to us, but then he told that story about opening this very fine dining restaurant, right? Like Boca is James Beard Award winner. It's also Michelin starred, right? So very fine dining. But then in the context of how this family, right, inside of Wendy's, like family of team members treat each other and how they treat their guests coming in the door, to use that as the backdrop of how we should treat each other in this restaurant and create that feeling of it's just it underscores kind of what you're telling me of, look, it's about taking care of each other and taking care of people. What a great lesson.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's an awesome story. I'm gonna have to retell that.
I mean, you should, right? I hope I told it right, Kevin Bain, but he was the one who shared the story. It's pretty amazing. So it seems to me, though, to create a culture where people really believe in taking care and creating relationships, you must hire a certain kind of person to come and work at your company. So, I mean, I'd love to understand, like, what is it that you look for and who is successful working inside of your company?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we have one of our ethos too is you're never too busy to be kind. And I think that that is incredibly important in supporting that culture of
Yeah.
hospitality. I think all you need is one bad egg in a culture, and it can start deteriorating slowly. It's not going to happen overnight. So I think when we hire very slowly because we need to make sure we understand the person that we're bringing
Yeah.
in. We're not looking at that person as, somebody who's just there to fulfill one task. They're part of the culture, and they need to come in and believe in that culture and want to have that culture flourish. There's obviously a skill set involved in certain roles that like we're also
Sure.
looking for, but sometimes that's equal, if not secondary, to like finding that perfect fit. Because so much can be learned, but you can't necessarily always teach kindness. Like some people, like you can try, but you can't always.
Yeah.
So I think for us, it's we take a lot of time and effort to get to know the person, have them get to know us, make sure this is a really good fit. because we're so protective of what we've built. And I think our clients have come to expect that of us, of not only is the work that we're producing of this really high caliber, but also the culture and the manner in which we're interacting with our clients and each other is fantastic. Like we've had a couple interactions where in the last couple years, we've met with teams in person for the first time after so many Zooms, right? Like we
Nice. Yeah.
here with somebody and we're like, wow, we actually get to meet and have dinner. And we've actually had some clients tell us like, wow, you guys are goals. Like this is like really great. It just feels good sitting at the table with your team. Like it's fun to hear that. And I think it starts with the hiring process. We're very intentional with who we bring on to make sure that it's a good fit, not just for us, but also for them. Like some people wouldn't fit with this and wouldn't be happy in this type of culture.
Yeah, I love that tenet for you too. I mean, and I agree that people should incorporate it. I incorporate it, at least I try to. I'm not perfect, but I love this whole people who are kind. Like, I think kindness matters, right? And I believe that anyone is capable of being kind. They just need to take a moment and be present, right? And like when I say that, it is about, you never know like what people might be going through in the moment that you're interacting with them, right? And I always say it's not, the stimulus, it's in how you choose to respond to people, and always choose kindness first. And kindness doesn't mean always like to be nice initially, but also kindness is also about being real with people. So
100%. Yeah, I think people think kindness is something where it's just, rainbows and unicorns, but it is, I think it's deeper than that. It's taking a moment, it's giving grace, exactly what you said.
yes,
Know what somebody is going through. So even if somebody feels super stressed, taking that moment. And I think too, as an agency and working with so many different types of people in so many different environments, I mean, hospitality can be incredibly stressful. Like
yeah,
in the restaurant side, there is a lot of things happening and people are working really long hours. Um, and so I think our role in that too is taking that step back and looking at, what are the problems that are happening and how can we help fix those? How can we help curate this and take this off of your plate so that we can, make that little piece of your life a little bit easier, or the stress of trying to market and get the right people in your restaurant or to buy your products.
that's right. I love that. And I love that it is about kindness is about giving grace. I mean, think about that as a statement too. All these amazing nuggets, Amanda, that we're coming up with from your culture creation. Now, I'd love to hear about lessons learned. So there are people, we talked about different backgrounds listening into CultureCast, but I think there are a lot of people who are now interested. All right, how do I take that leap of faith? What lessons learned as a founder, right? If there's any lessons that you can, or some life hacks around being a founder of a company, what's one or two that you could share with people
Yeah,
around, starting your own?
the first thing that I always go back to when somebody asks me that question is following your gut. The times
Yeah.
when I look back at the last 8 years since starting Curate Co, that I have not followed my gut. And by that, I mean, like maybe it's an opportunity to have a new client or to do a project, but my gut's telling me this isn't the right fit. But I
Yeah.
talk myself into it. I'm like, oh, but it's like, this is a great opportunity. It's expanding what we normally do. It's a great, like, let's test it out. Let's see. But if
Yeah.
my gut is telling me no, every time that I've said yes to those things, I have regretted it almost
Oh,
instantly. And so I've learned to really follow my gut of if my gut's telling me no, listen to it.
yeah.
Um, I think too, you have to be a little bit crazy. I mean, being an entrepreneur, there are so many doors closed. There's so many
Yeah.
no's, and there's so many, like I think I saw, and I think that's not just for entrepreneurs, but a lot of people that are, in their careers. There's so
Yeah.
many ups and downs. There's moments where you are getting out of your office and you're jumping up and down because there's a
Yeah.
big win. And then 2 days later, a door is slammed in your face that you thought was a for sure thing, or a huge challenge. And I think you just have to have the persistence and be a little bit crazy of like, okay, I'm just going to keep going.
Right?
This doesn't make sense. Yeah.
I love that. Well, follow your gut reminds me of having also real clarity about, you've talked about this too, of what it is that you value, what's most important to you. And if it doesn't fit within that, it's not worth it. You know, I think that's what I'm hearing you say, right?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
we are incredibly selective of the clients we take on. And I'll be
Yeah.
pretty honest with, we have so many conversations with potential clients. And sometimes I will say, I don't think we're the right fit for you. Like this is what you need. And I'll advise them on what I think they
Yeah.
need and what they should invest in. But, even if it's a massive opportunity, if we're not the right fit, I'll tell them that, because it isn't beneficial for anyone, my team or their team, if we sign on and they're on retainer or on a project basis and it doesn't make sense, and we're not inspired and excited. So yeah, that's definitely my advice.
I love that. And I also love the part, I think what I'm hearing you say too, you have to be a little bit crazy. But I'm going to go back to what you said earlier around having grit and resilience, right? So what you're explaining is there's going to be highs and lows, and grab those highs and remember that. But then also when there's lows or obstacles, you do need to have like resilience and just belief in, all right, well, that didn't work, but like, how do you pick up again and start again, right? And try something new or learn from it. And so that's okay to say it's a little crazy, but yeah, you've got to just have that belief. I love that.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, I always love asking my guests on CultureCast, since we are talking about all things culture, what are you loving these days? So I think about like, all right, and it could be anything, or everything. What are you wearing these days? What are you reading? What are you watching? Uh, all of that, all of the above in pop culture. Would love to hear that from you.
Great question.
Yeah.
Starting with reading, I have a very eclectic group of books that are on my nightstand right now. One, my mom actually just published a book called
Oh,
To
wow.
Me All Day Long. It's a novel, it's fictional. So I've been reading that, which is amazing. I have a 2.5-year-old son. And so I have a lot of parenting books of figuring out how
Oh,
to parent a toddler,
yeah.
which they're a little bit crazy too. And for fun, I actually just finished the first season of Emily in Paris, which is a pretty fun one on Netflix, since it's also about PR. So it's like the Hollywood version of what
Yes.
fashion world. So it's pretty fun. Um, and I feel like for wearing, I'm already starting to think about fall. I'm already thinking about boots and loafers and tights and
Oh my
suede,
gosh.
all the fun materials that I have to put away for spring and summer.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I know you mentioned earlier that you were in Boston, and I love that you have those 4 seasons where you can be wearing like the outerwear, right? Like it's a good excuse to be wearing fabulous coats. And I agree with you, boots and the amazing shoes. That's what I miss about living in New York. But then I'm going to go back to Emily in Paris. Okay, I binge watched season 4. I don't know if
Same.
you're on. Yeah, right. And I mean, I think it's only 6 episodes right now. And can I just ask this question? I think it's maybe just Candy, but what is she like? 25? The character is 25 in this. And have you noticed from first season to now, she was more like low high to now high high
Oh
on
yeah.
everything that she's wearing, like, and wearing, I think it was very Chanel forward, like last season, in terms of every handbag that she carried, which was all very new and bespoke. And like now it's a little more of a blend. I know we're talking about fashion, but like I'm astounded and amazed too. Like the fashion's amazing in that show.
Agreed. But yeah, it is very unrealistic. I mean, at one point, I think it was season 1 or 2, she was managing an entire PR firm in Paris for
Yeah.
like massive. I mean, I think it was a massive agency that had just purchased this, and she was
Yeah.
sent over to like manage the entire agency arm in Paris. And yeah, I remember seeing a lot of different articles and posts in the PR marketing world of people being like, that is never going to happen. Like it's
Right.
a Hollywood version and it's fun and it's,
Yeah, I agree with you. I binge watched that last week. And then I also came across on Netflix. It's a documentary. I think it's like 4 or 5 episodes of a K-pop, but a global K-pop group called Cat Eye that came together. So check that out. It's also interesting. It's a bunch of young women who end up making it into this K-pop group, which is not, it's K-pop-ish, but it's like global. So people are from around the world, not just Korea. So that's amazing. And then you'll have to remind us again your mom's book. Well, remind us the title of your mom's book. We'll have to read that.
It's called 2 Over Easy All Day Long. It's on Amazon. It's
Oh,
fantastic. Cannot say enough about it.
I love it. 2 hour easy all day long. We'll have to check that out. And then, Amanda, how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so you can check us out at curateandco.com on our website. You can also follow along on Instagram at Curate & Company, or my personal also, which is just my name, Amanda Arrigotti-White.
I love it. Well, before we close, what's like one last piece of advice in creating a culture of hospitality for folks who are listening?
Yeah, I think it's really practicing what you preach. It has to come from leadership. And you have to, if you want to create something, you got to do it yourself. And that will help create it. It's like the number one piece of advice I would have in that.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Culture is personal. Culture is a reflection of leadership. You are demonstrating that, Amanda. And I thank you so much for joining me on CultureCast. I'm excited to stay in touch.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, we're going to wrap, everyone, and we will see you next month in our next CultureCast with our next founder. All right, everyone. Take care.